Welcome, everybody. Thanks you for joining this open meeting of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Recruiting Working Group. So today we are happy to have Dr. Charla Lambert. She is at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, but she's also president of the SACNAS, which is the Advancing Chicanos, Hispanics and Native Americans in Science organization. She will talk about SACNAS and what they do, and it seems that it's already 50 years that they are working to diversify science in the US. And so she will have a presentation and then there will be time for questions. But if you have any question during her presentation, you can also write them in the chat and then I can ask Charla to answer when she will finish. And with that, I will invite Charla to unmute and to present.
All right. Well, thank you, Ana Rita, and the other members of the DEI recruitment group. I'm really happy to be with you all here today. The slides that I'm going to show you, you'll see they're sort of kind of general slides about SACNAS, and I only have about 10 of them. And so, as Ana Rita mentioned, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. What I'm going to do with these slides, there's sort of stock general slides that we use whenever we give these kinds of general introductory talks for different groups. I'm going to lace my personal story or insights or things that I think might be useful based on what I know about the Ag Biodata Consortium. So all that's to say, I'm really happy to be here with you all today because data science and genomic data science very near and dear to my heart. As Ana Rita mentioned, I'm the DEI officer at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York, which some of you may be familiar with. And the other hat that I wear through the end of this year, and then I'll be outgoing president next year, is I'm currently the elected president of SACNAS. And so I put my email there because the rest of the slides will be sort of very general. How can you contact SACNAS? But Ana Rita definitely has my email address and it's listed here on this slide in case anybody wants to follow up and ask more questions after today. So a little bit about me. I'm currently, deep in administration as DEI officer at Cold Spring Harbor. And then also sort of deep into nonprofit governance, being on the board of directors of SACNAS. My scientific training, however, is in computational biology and in genomics. I came to Cold Spring Harbor after my postdoc to work on education programs through one of the divisions, the Meetings and Courses Division, which organizes the small conferences and the advanced short courses that some of you may have participated in or may have sent some of your students and postdocs to. And that's how I ended up at Cold Spring Harbor. So I come from genomics background and now wear multiple hats trying to kind of help run things and also help diversify lots of different areas in science. I'm still very much focused in my day job on biology and biomedical sciences. But as SACNAS president, I get to think about what diversity looks like in lots of disciplines, and I'll show you that in just a second. All right. So a little bit about SACNAS. As Ana Rita mentioned, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And so it was founded in 1973 by a very small group of Chicano scientists, so Mexican Americans, essentially, in biology, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. And the history, the lore goes that they were all at a AAAS meeting in Albuquerque, I think, and got into the elevator. They all fit into one elevator. And then somebody said something really morbid, like, oh, if this elevator goes down, like, that's it for Chicano scientists in the US. So maybe we should do something about that, like get together, build a community. And so it's been growing strong for 50 years. in part helping to diversify science and in part helping to build a really solid community for specifically Chicanos and Native Americans in the US who are interested in careers in STEM. And so on the scientific professional side, we focus on support for obtaining advanced degrees, careers and positions in leadership in STEM. And then sort of on the personal community side, we do this in a very specific way by emphasizing culture and community right alongside of science. And what that ends up being now, 50 years later, the talking points are that SACNAS is now the largest multicultural and multidisciplinary science STEM diversity organization in the US. And I'll show you some numbers so you can get a feel if you've never participated in a SACNAS program or been to the annual conference. But on this last point, science, culture, and community, I think this is really important. This was definitely important in my experience at SACNAS. The way that SACNAS kind of very intentionally integrate science, culture, and community. We do this through celebrating and not assimilation. So we meet people where they are, and you'll see a little bit about the institutions and where people come from who are part of the SACNAS membership. And we celebrate and recognize that the way that they approach science is sort of very integrally defined by all of their different identities, where they come from, and that those perspectives are all very much needed in science. So rather than focusing on, where people are and saying you have to assimilate into this structure, more about celebrating how they approach science, the questions that they ask, the things that they're interested in. And recognizing very specifically that it's shaped by where people come from. I've been a member of SACNAS for about 20 years. I went to my first SACNAS conference when I was a graduate student at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I remember talking to all of my fellow students who were at the conference with me. We had, over 20 years ago now, like really hard conversations about identity and what we felt like we could tell our research mentors about our interests outside of the lab, and how when we came to the SACNAS conference, it felt like we could bring all aspects of ourselves, right? We didn't have to compartmentalize in order to fit into a scientific system that we felt like we were maybe studying in and getting our degrees in. Luckily, I think that's changed. It's sort of continually evolving over the past 20 years. But still, SACNAS is the place where people feel like they can come and breathe, they can be human, they can be sort of all dimensions of themselves. And that's really important to us in the way that we run the organization. And so today, whereas SACNAS started off 50 years ago, the way a lot of scientific societies do, with scientists who just put in a lot of extra free time because they're really invested in building this community. SACNAS now has a 20-person, I think it's 20 now, professional staff. And so there's an executive director that runs a staff kind of full time. And then we on the board of directors are elected from the membership and help run the small army of volunteers that are organized into lots of different committees. And so it's, sort of progressed in a really, really nice way where we have professional staff members who are really excellent at their jobs. They're specialists in membership, in program development, in communications. And those of us who are elected to the board of directors get to work with them in partnership to kind of help achieve the goals and the mission of what SACNAS is set out to do. Okay, so this is what the multidisciplinary side of the membership looks like. We're at a little over 10,000 active members. And then another number that we often say is it's close to, it's 28,000, 29,000, something like that, that are on various kind of listservs. And so these are people who don't necessarily have an active membership, but did at one point or came to the conference to, sort of present research, but, have gone off in different directions now and still are sort of active advocates in the SACNAS community. But the 10,000 number here is active memberships. And it's about 3/4 students, so undergraduate and graduate students, and then 1/4 postdocs and professionals in various different sectors, positions, and institutions. And then you can see the multidisciplinary kind of breakdown. SACNAS had its origins sort of very closely aligned and funded and supported by the National Institutes of Health in the US. And this meant that throughout all of SACNAS's history, biology and biomedical sciences were sort of front and center, because that's where a lot of our funding came from. However, strategically, over the last decade or so, we've been thinking about and implementing lots of different ways to kind of broaden the disciplinary reach of SACNAS, so that physical sciences, engineering in particular, feel like there's programming, there's career development, and there's mentorship connections that can be made in SACNAS. But you can see, like, in any given year, about half of the disciplinary representation among the SACNAS membership is in life sciences, biomedical sciences, and related fields. This is what the multicultural side of the membership looks like. So about half of the SACNAS membership identifies as Hispanic Latino, and this is both sort of people who grew up in the US and also people who may have immigrated to the US for graduate school, for postdoc, for permanent positions. About 20% identifies as white, about 9% Asian, 8% Black or African American. I say 8% American Indian or Indigenous. I tend to put together American Indian, Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Indigenous Pacific Islander together. And then 3 to 4% of other. But that's what the multicultural side looks like. It's very sort of broadly diverse, broadly representative of the US. And this is how I like to phrase it, because I get a lot of questions about the SACNAS name, and if I don't identify as Chicano, Hispanic, or Native American, or Indigenous, can I still participate in SACNAS programs? And the answer is yes. And how I like to phrase this is that SACNAS is a very inclusive organization, so anyone is welcome. And you will see, if you've participated in our annual conference, for example, that we culturally, and in terms of science, and in terms of sort of the sessions that are presented, we achieve this kind of inclusivity by centering Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans in science. And so there are cultural elements. There's Native American blessings at the beginning of almost all of our programs. There's powwow as part of the annual conference. There's a pachanga, a salsa dance, as part of the conference. On top of that, there are Native and Indigenous scientists who are elevated with awards and recognized and celebrated with awards. There is a track through the conference on Indigenous knowledge. There are programs very specifically for Chicano and Native students who are coming from either primarily undergraduate, minority-serving tribal colleges and universities in the US, other institutions in the US that don't have a lot of resources necessarily to invest in their students' research capabilities, or sending them every year to an annual conference like SACNAS. And so we still honor our history and our name by centering Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native and Indigenous Americans. But we also honor sort of everybody's intersectional identities, meaning that we have receptions for women in STEM, we have receptions for LGBTQ scientists, we have receptions for Afro-Latinx, Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Caribbean members who come to our conference. We're starting a disability and accessibility group that will sort of be woven into the programming in the same way. And so if you can think of it that way, that we honor our name and our history, but we're broadly inclusive, and sort of anybody is welcome if all of that sort of speaks to you. Okay, so one of the year-round programs that SACNAS invests in is the SACNAS chapters. So there's currently 145 chapters in institutions across the U.S., including Puerto Rico and Guam. These provide year-round local support. They are they provide year-round local support, community development for members kind of that are stationed in different home institutions. These are primarily run by students, either graduate or undergraduate students. And the SACNAS staff provides them a whole lot of support in order to keep them on track, help them with sustainability and succession planning, things like that. But what this does, because at the national level, we're very much focused on, sort of advanced degrees, leadership development, not pre-college. What the SACNAS chapters can do, in addition to sort of building community for the members at a very local level, it also allows the SACNAS chapters to do that in a way that sort of speaks to them. And that often ends up being outreach, sort of public engagement and community outreach, especially to local high schools, to kind of pay it forward to the next generation of students who are coming up and might be interested in careers in science. So I think of the 145, something like 137 right now are student run chapters. And the last 7 or 8 are actually professional chapters run by professionals at either lots of different, up to 7 or 8 at this point, different companies and institutions, including the NIH in Bethesda. And so we're growing the professional chapters because it's a sense of kind of community and belonging that people want kind of at every step our members want at every step in their careers. So while chapters started off as very much by and for the students, we're focusing on building up the professional chapters also to kind of translate that sense of kind of community and belonging once people have their own permanent positions. Some other signature programs, I'd like to break these up into 3. So there's a portfolio of leadership development programs. The LPSLI is focused on early and mid-career professionals. It's been going every year since 2009. Postdoc Leadership Institute is a couple of years old. It's attached to the conference and very specifically focused on postdocs and other kind of in-between positions. And then the chapter officers Leadership October Retreat, which is a really fun acronym color, also takes place at the conference, and it's a leadership development program for the officers of the 145 chapters that I just mentioned. There's also a portfolio of Native and Indigenous chapter programming, including virtual chapters for tribal colleges and universities, mini conferences for members from TCUs. And then one of our programs has been funded for a number of years now is the Scholars in Science Native American Path, or the SNAP program, which partners with tribal serving and tribal colleges and universities to reach students, Native and Indigenous students who are interested in careers in science and gives them support to help them figure out what that might look like and what makes sense for them. And then a couple of the mentoring programs we have, I just put these in big categories because I would say the annual conference is all about mentoring connections, and there are a lot of things that are attached to that, like chances to sign up as a one-on-one mentor. There's research presentations, and so there's chances to sign up as judges for the poster presentation or the oral presentations in order to meet some of the student presenters one-on-one. It's structured like many scientific conferences. It's a huge exhibit hall where institutions and companies and organizations have booths, and students can wander around and talk to them individually. Another kind of big umbrella program under mentoring designed to create and reinforce connections is CareerCon, and that's specifically for Mostly graduate students, although some postdocs and some senior undergraduates who are interested in careers in industry and government. And so there's industry partners, a lot of different companies who want sort of, kind of dedicated, kind of direct access to students and postdocs who are interested in industry careers. All right, but I've mentioned the conference a couple of times now. It's definitely the flagship program of SACNAS. It's the National Diversity in STEM Conference, or NDI STEM. It takes place every October, right around Halloween. This year, I think it's on Halloween in Phoenix. Last year, it was our 50th anniversary, as I mentioned. It was in Portland, Oregon. And this is what the numbers in Portland were like. There were about 6,300 people who attended the conference. Very large, much larger than I remember from 20 years ago, much larger than I think it's like 50 or 60 people total who came to the first conference in 1973. About 50% of the attendees, and this is pretty stable even as the conference itself grows, about 50% are students, undergraduate and graduate students. The ethnicity kind of mirrors what I showed you with the larger membership numbers. Also, the disciplines also mirror what I showed you with the membership numbers. But a couple of other numbers that you might be interested in. About a third of the people who come to the conference every year, including a lot of the students, come from minority serving institutions, mostly Hispanic serving institutions. And then about half of them come from not doctoral awarding or not research intensive institutions. Right? And then 50% are first generation, meaning no other members of their parents, grandparents, extended family went to college. And so that's a really good, sort of snapshot of where our students and where our members come from. They go to school at not research intensive institutions at the undergraduate level. Half of them are first generation. A third of them come from minority serving institutions. And so coming to the conference in a place where they are able to present research from maybe summer research programs, maybe something they've been working on for a couple of years, and meet professionals from lots of different companies, lots of different academic institutions, is, sort of nothing short of transformative, essentially. This is, very marketing information from the SACNAS staff. So at the conference, there's chances to, sort of partner by exhibit, like having a booth. Scientific societies do this in really creative ways. There's a group of smaller geoscience societies that get booths together, and then they brand it as the Convergence Zone, which is super cool. Some of the exhibits that happen in the exhibit hall are very large. If they're from big companies or big government agencies, Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory is pretty small. We get one booth a year. We try to do really, really creative things in order to connect with students and sort of have them come back to the booth to be able to ask questions. So those of us who are scientists will sign up as one-on-one mentors or as poster judges or any of the other kind of mechanisms that are built into the conference that allow kind of personal connections with a lot of the students who are presenting there. And then if they're interested, then we can tell them about the booth and they can go visit the booth. But all that's to say, like, a lot of the standard ways of either partnering or exhibiting that exist at lots of other scientific societies also exist at SACNAS. Are the partners and the exhibitors who either come to the NDI STEM conference or partner with SACNAS year-round. They're from all over, industry, nonprofits, government, higher education, academic research institutes like mine. But they're willing and interested in it and accessing, sort of students and scientists from all over. And in particular, engaging with an inclusive community. And so if they are interested in that and they're coming to it, sort of from a very authentic way, then those are the best sort of long-term stable partnerships that have existed in SACNAS over the years. These are just some, fun pictures. I think these are all from these are all from last year, and the 50th anniversary in Portland. So these are all pictures from the NDI STEM conference, give you an idea of what it looks like there. And we can come back and you can dig into these, or I can share these slides, and you can circulate them too if you want to take a look and see if you recognize anyone. And then just for a final slide, this is where you can find SACNAS. It's on the web. It's where a lot of the information is. During the Q&A session, if something specific comes up, I can drop links directly in the chat to kind of help you navigate where different things are on the website. Some of the emails that you might need: partnerships at SACNAS, exhibits at SACNAS, all the social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I use that sort of more often than anything else at this point. I'm also on Twitter/X, but I don't use that nearly as often as I used to. But you can find me on both of those if that's your preferred way of asking questions. This logo that you see here is from the 50th anniversary celebration all last year. It was designed specifically for that. We also have logo and marketing attached to the conference every year, and all of the artwork like this we commission from our membership. And so the artwork that's going to be coming out for the conference in Phoenix in October is commissioned from an artist in the Southwest. This logo, I think, was done by a graduate student at the University of Washington. It was either that or the artwork from the 50th NDI STEM last year. So the artwork is also a big part of it because it's a different way that a lot of our students and scientists choose to express themselves and also their scientific ideas. And so we like to celebrate and elevate that also. Also, I just really love this logo, and I will keep putting it in presentations for as long as I can. At some point, it will become not as relevant, but we're still, just barely out of the 50th year. So I wanted to include it. All right, and I think that's all I have in terms of preparation. So I'll get out of my slides and then see if you all have very specific questions that I can either point you to or help you kind of think through that would be really relevant for what you're thinking about in terms of DEI recruiting.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Charla. I learned a lot about SACNAS, especially the wide diversity that it includes. Like, I didn't know about that. So thank you so much. I will start asking if there is anyone that has a specific question for Charla.
I do, Anarita. Thanks for pulling this together as always. And Charla, thanks for taking time out of your day. I've got a couple of different specific questions. One is very specific. As we have been being more proactive in tracking data, it's pretty clear that health science field, life science fields are much, much more diverse than they were. I'm sorry, excuse me. Back when I was one of the several white boys in all the science classes, in the 70s. But it's still, so when you look at the life sciences, things are, they're looking fairly good. When you look at engineering, however, that's a different story. What do you think are some of your lessons that your organization has learned, maybe, of how to more specifically address that shortfall?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Something that that we're thinking about. There's a new consortium getting off the ground that's coming out of Northeastern University in Boston that is very much specifically thinking about that. There's a couple of things that I think I can say with my DEI hat on that In the life sciences, and I will say very specifically sort of agricultural, maybe Evo Devo, other areas in life sciences, you know, sort of way ahead of a lot of other areas. Molecular biology, like, you know, is doing well, but there's still some things in terms of the culture of the discipline that I think it's a little bit behind on. But to me, when I see, you know, sort of numbers that are really, you know, kind of stubbornly biased, and this could be gender first before race, ethnicity, nationality, background, to me that's speaking to kind of the culture of the discipline itself. And I think that's one of the things that biology has done better, that in terms of, like, I love talking to neuroscientists about this because they're like, oh yeah, it makes total sense in terms of, you know, what it means to have bias structures, what it means for them to get ingrained and create structural barriers for lots of different people. Like, the neuroscientists are like, yeah, it makes total sense. And the openness to be able to distinguish between how we've already always done something and how we can do something to achieve the same goals. I think biology has done better. I think there's still, in engineering, physical sciences, there's still a resistance to that. And so the idea of the culture and the structures being able to evolve to become more inclusive, specifically by saying, like, there are different ways that we can do things in order to achieve the same goals, in order to select for, you know, really smart students, in order to develop really smart students. The openness to being able to do that differently, I think, is the thing that is making the numbers so kind of stubbornly not diverse in a lot of physical sciences. And I say this coming from math. Like, I was a math and computer science major before I went into genomics as a grad student. And I think my undergraduate major, I think it was 9% women at the time, much less, you know, sort of, you know, any kind of racial ethnic diversity within the US.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I think it always points to a culture to me, and that culture being able to change starts with kind of a recognition that the way we've always done something is not necessarily the best and the only way to do it.
Okay, thanks. I'll let other people ask questions. I might circle back around if there's time.
I think Tanya is the next.
That's me. Hi, Charla. My
Tanya.
question has to do with advocating for DEI in states where there's a public ban on using funds for these efforts. There are more and more states, and it's, I'm sure for you, frustrating. And yet you probably have member chapters there. And
Yep.
how are they managing to do what they do? What is it, a different strategy, or like, what's the path there?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I would say it's an evolving answer. It's an evolving situation. Luckily, what I see is that chapters and student groups, as long as they're sort of broadly inclusive and open to everyone, so a SACNAS chapter can still, like, develop its own mission and say, these are the things we're going to be focused on. And as long as they're inclusive to the membership, I think they end up being exempt. So it's a nice thing that so far is in place. If you would have asked me this last summer, I would have said that pathway and recruitment programs were also, because if you know, sort of protected a little bit, because the idea was that, you know, if you, like, just like going on the SCOTUS decision, the Supreme Court decision, like, if you can't use race and ethnicity in any sort of admission process, at least you can, you know, choose to invest in making sure that your networks are incredibly diverse, so that any sort of application pool or, you know, kind of base that you have for student applications or job applications would be really diverse to begin with. So that would have been my answer last summer before you know, sort of Iowa just passed like this very sweeping legislation. Yeah, and so I would say in those states, like it's still very much in the air. Like I have a really good friend who is in student programs in Iowa, and he's like, I'm going to lose my job this summer, like because like they're dissolving everything. It's not just a matter of what is this? This is this is student services. This is making sure that we as an institution are achieving our mission of kind of broadly serving the region or broadly serving. And so all of those arguments seem to go out the door, especially with really sweeping legislation like what we're seeing sort of take place in Iowa. So yeah, I would say it's really frustrating. It's really hard. I don't know that I have a good answer. There are some states that have been working around it, and there are some states also where there are sort of very like valid challenges to it. Yeah, like for me, I'm in New York, like New York and New Jersey, like they're pretty close to codifying DEI as a requirement for higher education, which is fantastic. But for the other states, what I can say from SACNAS, from the SACNAS side is that historically, the SACNAS membership was in California and Texas. Huge proportions of the SACNAS membership were in California and Texas. And so there have been, and then also, I mean, we're going to Phoenix. We haven't been in Phoenix since 2001 or 2002. And so from the Southwest and Texas, there have been lots of instances over the years where we're like, do we stop taking our conference there? And the answer has always been no, because we have these really hard discussions over like what is going to make our participants and attendees unsafe versus what can we do to like have a show of solidarity with our large numbers of members who are in that state. And so if there's a question of being unsafe, and so that was the conversation around like North Carolina and the bathroom bills, for example, or Arizona for the last 20 years, and the papers, please. Are participants going to be unsafe if they go to that state right now? And if the answer is yes, then we're like, okay, we'll skip it for a couple of years. But if the answer is like, just don't like what Texas is doing right now, like that's not enough, because we have so much of our membership that's there, and we need to go and sort of show them a different way, and that we're supported. And like 6,000 SACNistas like descending on a city in Texas like has a lot of power. So yeah, it's not a good answer, I don't think, for because I don't have one for states like Iowa that are doing outright bans across the board. But it's something that we're going to have to, that we continue talking about sort of on a case-by-case basis, especially when it comes to knowing that our members and our students and, our professional members do exist in those states. And as long as they do, can we do about that and with that?
Right. Thank you.
Leonard?
Hi, Charlotte. Can you hear me okay? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's really great to have this conversation, and I really appreciate your coming to speak with us. I guess my question is, sort of given what AgBio Data is, we're that scrappy organization that has been doing pretty much everything by volunteer, for the last, 5 or 6 years, and that we are, basically comprised of databases, right? And our whole sort of goal is around, making information accessible to all. And I'm just sort of wondering, it's like, do you have any sort of thoughts about, what can we do to, support your mission, to support SACNAS's mission, and support, students, who are interested in agricultural and genomics? I mean, we're not, some of us teach, some of us at a university, some of us are like tiny little nonprofits. But I'm sort of thinking about like, within the mission of who we are, and maybe thinking about it in terms of democratizing information, what's the sweet spot for us?
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. Thank you for asking that. Because I think it speaks a little bit to sort of meeting our members where they are. And one example, which you probably all have heard of, there's an organization called the Native Biodata Consortium. And that is all about data sovereignty and recognizing that data that comes from, like biological data that comes from Indigenous people in the US. Indigenous people should own and sort of be responsible for storing it, and also kind of have some sort of control over the analysis. So like that is, I think that's an amazing organization for a couple of reasons. Like one, the idea of sovereignty, including data and biological data, like it very much switches kind of the perspective of how a lot of us were trained in science. Right? There was one way to collect data. We had the data. You have to, basically like use our tools or provide input to the way that we did it, as opposed to, whoever the data came from, are the ones that get to answer all those questions and sort of control that kind of access. Yeah, Crystal. So Crystal Sosi, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
But that kind of, so thinking about it that way, kind of flipping the script a little bit, it's another reason why I was really happy and excited to come talk to you, because I got the impression that you all were like this collection of really scrappy organizations, and they're like, what can we do? And that's very different than talking to sort of data resource people in the federal government. Which very much come at it from a like, here are resources, please come to us. And so the idea of, kind of having really, really grassroots conversations about the data that's collected, the data that's useful, like the access to it, things like that. I think you all are in a really good position to be able to do that, and also to be able to, like where it makes sense and where it's appropriate, make changes to that, because you are, like much closer to kind of a grassroots organization than something that's been funded by and sort of made it through all the different levels of federal funding agencies. And then they're like, nope, we got it right. Like, we can't actually change anything at this point. Yeah, and then the other thing that I really liked about like what Crystal talks about, and if you've had Keolu Fox come and talk to you, he's works with Crystal in a couple of different contexts. And he's in the anthropology department at UCSD, also trained as a genomic scientist at the University of Washington. And so he talks a lot, and he works with companies on, sort of return of resources. And I think that's also something that you all are in a really great position to be able to contribute to the conversation. Right. So if you collect data, from a particular community, like what's the responsibility in terms of return of resources on what comes out of that data? And the idea that you all are in a place where you can contribute to those conversations in a really meaningful way and be able to influence companies or federal organizations, things like that. Like that's also like, I think something really meaningful and really kind of accessible for where you all are in your different organizations. So the idea that you can gather people who are all used to, in this, and you're all kind of on the beginning stages, maybe, before something makes it all the way into a structure that's not going to be able to be modified. So the fact that you can have conversations and, maybe advocate for changes collectively, maybe just choose to do things differently and then talk about why you do things differently. I think that's really powerful.
I think that's a really, really great idea, right? Thinking we have, Maize GDB is one of our organizations, right? As a plant biologist, I tend to think about this a lot in the context of, medicinal plant knowledge, agricultural species and what happens, like, who benefits from the commodification of all of that. So, immediately I start thinking about, we work a lot on working groups and kind of coming up with sort of standards and practices, and how do agricultural biological databases functionally embrace and enforce care principles might be like an actionable thing that we can do.
Yeah, I love that because I often think, you know, sort of from my field, I was definitely in human genomics. Like, why was return of results or community building, like, why was that always in my head? It was sort of cordoned off to the side as ethics projects and not kind of fundamentally built into the goals and, you know, the outcomes that was part of the research. So it was sort of like, here's the research and here's all the ethical things that you could do on top of it. So I love the idea of kind of bringing those together, right? So part of the research is thinking about return of resources, who benefits, things like that. I love that.
John, I think we have time for another question. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question, I'm going to do it backwards. I'll give you the question and the reasoning after. Has your organization had the time, money, or bandwidth to address specifically growth in jobs? To make more jobs available for everyone, including, for example, like in engineering, uh, the disciplinary organization. So rather than asking someone to start a new student organization with a new group, target the disciplinary organizations, women in engineering or the American Association of Physics or whatever it might be. Because I know, in ag, I look at it, I was kind of one of the first wave, if you will, in my generation of, back to the farm kind of movement. But we had serious participation from women in ag back basically from World War II on, and also like in medical field. So, now I hate to admit, they're 4 generations on. We've had that generational mentoring, right? As well as growth in jobs. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Like, have you been able to specifically address, more jobs and more inclusion in specific fields?
Yeah, also really, really great question. And what I will say is probably only organically or, sort of on a case by case basis. I think SACNAS has like its model has been really, really successful, sort of on an like individual relationship level, regardless of whether that's with students or with with a group or a particular university or more recently, particular companies. And so it's definitely been historically a grassroots model where it's like, all right, we're going to provide community and support and follow people like through their careers. And what we see now is that, in biotech companies, there's enough people who grew up in SACNAS programs. They got together, they formed their own chapter, and they are sort of using kind of SACNAS programs, connections, networks to help make their company that, like, I'm thinking of Myriad biotech company, like more inclusive and, sort of more community oriented from the inside. And so that is a very, very indirect way for SACNAS, kind of, if I'm thinking of the national organization, to have an effect in the way that you're talking about. What we have only recently, we're in the middle of a 5-year strategic plan. And this is like the first time that we've gotten really, really organized about like, all right, SACNAS has been around for 50 years. Like, what can we do kind of on the national stage in terms of advocacy, in terms of, sort of exerting the influence of the SACNAS community and the successes and the outcomes that SACNAS has had over 50 years. So what can we do on the national stage to help influence that? So I would say it's relatively new on a large scale that SACNAS is interested in this. And it's because like it's been very successful kind of on the individual level for so long that we're just getting to now where we're like, oh, maybe there is something that we can do. And so maybe there is something that we can do by partnering with scientific societies, like in particular disciplines. We've been talking to a lot of the geosciences societies, like, is there some way that we can get together, kind of build something mutually beneficial, and then kind of pool our resources in order to be able to advocate for X, Y, or Z kind of in geosciences that would benefit all of our members. So that's kind of where we're at. The other thing that we're doing, which I think will affect this long term, is SACNAS members have always, like, disproportionately, like very large proportion of our membership come from community colleges. And so they go to community college, transfer to 4-year, maybe do a post-bac or do, like, sort of research for a couple of years, then maybe go to grad school. And so we are in the very beginning stages of, like, okay, what does like a SACNAS investment in relationships with our community colleges look like? So rather than just allowing that to happen and recognizing, like, oh, a lot of our membership comes from there, what can we do to actually invest in that? And I think in terms of jobs, like community college out into lots of different kinds of tech jobs, 4-year colleges out into lots of different kind of tech jobs, and then sort of where we've made our name, graduate school, sort of PhD level scientists and engineers out into all sorts of jobs. I think that's going to help a lot, because I think the landscape of a lot of especially tech and engineering jobs is going to change. You're not going to need a PhD for a lot of stuff. And so can we sort of invest in the partnerships at the community college level to complement what we've got going on at the 4-year and the PhD serving institutions right now? So I'd say, like, really early days on that. It's an important question, but it's a kind of new territory for SACNAS to think about things kind of on a big national level, especially when it comes to the job market and kind of what our members can, like, all the different things that our members can be prepped for.
I think there is one last question from Jackie in the chat. Do you want me to read it loud, or? Well, I will. Hello, I have a question. The USDA has encouraged employees to hire underrepresented undergraduate and graduate students for summer internship. The USDA team I belong to has hired multiple underrepresented undergraduates and are very excited about their work. My question is, these internships are virtual, and is there anything my USD team should do to ensure we continue to mentor and grow these interns since they are virtual?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. And especially since the pandemic, I feel like this is a question that we all ask. There's something really great about virtual meetings, webinars, virtual internships, especially when it comes to data science, in that, like, doing things virtually increases accessibility so much. But yeah, the question's really important. In terms of how do you, like, build the connection that would have happened organically, like if your internship program happened in person. So yeah, all right, thank you. I'm glad that I interpreted what you were saying correctly, Jackie. Yeah, so there's a number of things. I don't know if you're getting any guidance from the USDA on this, but the things that we talk about whenever we talk through virtual programs is building in space, for conversations that don't necessarily have anything to do with the internship. So, like, you can have regular meetings about a particular project. You can have regular team meetings, like if you have multiple interns that you're mentoring, or there can be sort of cohort meetings, on Zoom between all of the interns in the USDA, like this summer. And all of that, I think, is really great. But, like, how do you sort of forge the personal connections and, like, the kind of conversations that would have happened, if they were living in the same dorm together, or if, everybody, had, like, went out for a meal. And so those are the things that I think are really, really important, because I know, at least with the students that we work with, the idea that their science is just their science and it's the only thing that's important feels very inauthentic to them. And so the idea that they can come and like they can bond with people over the schools that they come from or the towns where they grew up in, or how they grew up, or their families, or the questions that they're grappling with their families right now, which are often like, what are you doing? How long are you going to do the science thing? Is it ever going to end? Yes, when are you going to make money and move back home? All of those kinds of questions. So the idea that there's space for the interns to be able to do that. So have those conversations, whether it happens on a cohort level or within a particular lab, being able to have, sort of regular personal conversations, so that there's a human connection to what they're actually doing at the USDA. And then the other thing is in terms of the science, making space for kind of their questions and their perspectives in the science that they're doing. And however that happens in a virtual way, it happens, again, kind of naturally and organically when people feel like they have a human connection to everyone around them. And they're like, oh, well, I was thinking about this other thing, which, people have told me is completely off the wall, but being able to make space for that, because, that's one of the big reasons why we want diversity in STEM, right? To have lots of different perspectives, lots of different questions. And so it's much harder to do, I think, in a virtual setting. But I think allowing for that and knowing that sort of going in is going to go a long way to, having a couple steps closer to the kind of experience that they might have had if the internships were in person. Yes. When are you going to get a real job? We get that all the time. We all do. And so creating space, and sort of allowing for those conversations, I think will help a lot, Jackie.
Leonard?
Yeah. So Leonard, I love that. So creating a virtual space for them on Discord, something like that, where they can chat, they can do it asynchronously. There's ways of starting kind of regular meetings, like weekly meetings, sort of asking, like, all right, what's, I don't know, thinking about something like, what's one thing that you want to celebrate that happened this past week? Just to sort of break the ice and get people thinking, like about their whole selves, as opposed to just the one thing in the project that they probably feel like, oh, I think I just messed that up and I'm going to have to come to this meeting now, and like, which we all do again. So yeah, I think being creative, I guess, about making space for those conversations. Yes.
Leonard?
Oh, I know. I was just sort of like thinking about this again about, I don't know whether or not within your internship, is there an opportunity to like send people to a conference? Like, could one of the outcomes from your internship be going and presenting at SACNAS? So that you're actually helping, these students then connect. Whoa. Sorry, I just got a loud noise.
Yep. I love that. And I didn't even, bribe Lenore to say that. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
I used to work with John Matsui at UC Berkeley. And so, yeah, I think that opportunity to present and to be in the presence of, scientist mentors who you really can have a connection to is really important.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a different kind of professional development for all of us, right? Like we all possibly thrive in the kind of professional development where we're going and presenting something that we did that we're proud about. And the students are no different, right? Like putting them in a situation where like, they're like, I worked all year on this, and now I get to talk to, sort of scientists and potential mentors about this. Like there's nothing quite like that, I think, for forging connections.
There, I think we are at top of the hour, but if there is the last question, we can make a very short question, we can do it. The advice, I will thank Charla for the great presentation and conversation. Really thank you for joining us, and for sure, and also for letting us know that there is a conference that we may attend in the future, which we are looking for conferences where we can represent AgBioData and maybe introduce us to students that for sure use our databases, but maybe don't know about AgBioData and what we do. So thank you so much. I will share the recordings of YouTube, and I will also share your contact with anyone that is interested in if they have a follow-up question or anything else. Thank you, all of you, for joining and for the great conversation and question.